President of Court, please place the skull cap on your head. You speak Hebrew, do you?
I do speak Hebrew, but I want to testify in Yiddish.
President of Court, please, go ahead. Please place your right hand on the Bible now.
Yosef.
All the previous remarks which were not translated were connected with a technical hitch about the microphone. Please say after me, I swear by God Almighty that my testimony in this trial will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. You may remove the skull cap from your head, and please give us your full name.
Reznik Yosef.
If you wish, you may.
Those who remained in Maidan Tapask in Lublin.
Where were they taken, Mr. Reznik?
They were all brought to field number 5 at Majdanek.
What happened to all of these people on the 2nd and 3rd of November 1943?
As
they were being brought to this field 5, the whole columns would be sent to the graves. The gate was opened and all men were driven into those graves, driven to their death while the band played. The band kept on playing all the time, and they chose the music so that the people, the inmates, should not see and not notice how the others were being taken to their death. They were brought from the back gate. And in the graves, the machine guns worked all the time near the graves.
And then an SS officer approached you and asked you what your occupation was. Is that right? And then he told you to start digging,
yes.
Right?
Yes.
You began digging, and what did you discover?
Mit dem Mal hat sie die Schufle gegeben als ein Glitz. Hab wir getroffen auf einen Kopf von einem Menschen. Und sie sah aus von unter als ein Reach, nicht ein guter.
I was digging with my spade, and after 2 or 3 earthfuls of the spade, I felt that the spade hit something hard, and then I saw that it was the head of a human being. There was also a bad smell all around.
I'll ask you the questions about this subject. Now, you wanted to stop working, but Rolfinger came and shouted at you. Is that so?
Und sagt, was bist du stehen geblieben? Du weißt nicht, dass da liegen Figuren, sagt
Rolfinger screamed at me and said, "Why did you stop working? Why did you halt? Don't you know that there are bodies buried in this grave?"
Well, in other words, you had opened a mass grave. Is that right?
Yes.
How many bodies were in the grave?
Dort ist in der ersten Gruppe, das ist gewesen bei 150 oder bis 170 Meter der Länge.
I'm asking how many bodies there were in the grave.
This was the first grave, 150 or 170 meters long, and there was some 10,000 corpses in that grave.
Now you exhumed the bodies and you were told to burn them, isn't that right?
Yes.
Did they bring a kind of a grinding machine to the place?
Man hat gebracht am Mehl zu mahlen die Beine. Noch Verbrennen ist geblieben die Beine, seine gestanden unsere Chevre, und man hat gesiebt die Beine, und dabei haben sie gestanden gleich und zugenommen das Gold. Oder das ist geblieben Gold oder Zähne von den Menschen. Und die Beine hat man gebracht in eine Maschine, was hat gemalt. Und später noch einmal hat man zerfiert die Mehl von den Menschen, die Beine, die Pool auf die Felder. Und das ist gewesen sehr bitter, mit das nicht gekannt halten Mäuler viel auch.
They brought a grinding machine to grind the bones, and then the ground material would be sieved and they would remove the gold fillings. The bones, after burning the bodies, were ground. And then the dust of the bones would be taken to the fields to be spread over the fields. The smell was terrible. One could hardly breathe.
And thus you continued working for quite some time in opening graves?
No.
3 months.
How many graves did you open during that period?
8
There was some 8 or 9 graves. I do not remember exactly. One of the graves would remain open all the time for new corpses. The new corpses would be coming on all the time continuously. A truck would bring them hot, warm bodies which would be thrown into the graves. They were naked, like Adam and Eve.
Now, the bodies which you opened, the graves which you opened, could you identify whether these were graves of Jews?
There were Jews there, because I found many documents, and there were bearded Jews. There were those who used to perform the slaughter, the ritual slaughter, the Jewish ritual slaughter.
How could you recognize that they were?
Did you see the execution of men at Majdanek?
Yes, by hanging.
How many times?
It was almost daily. Daily it was.
You said daily.
Yes. This appel, the roll call, that was usually at 6 a.m. when they had the punishments. It was enough for a sentry to take down the number of an inmate and to hand it over to the senior, the camp senior. And then during the roll call, the inmate would be called.
President of court, this is the elder of the camp, and the words to the interpreter of court.
And then they would call this inmate. There were punishments by hanging and then by beating, according to the transgression.
For what offense would they be hanged, and which offense called for beatings?
For neglecting work, this could have been hanging. Absence from work also. Well, absence from work did not really exist. I meant being away from work for a few moments. Or even if the sentry, the guard, just didn't take a liking to you. And then in the presence of the entire camp, without any explanations, the people would be hanged. They had to undress, climb up on a chair, and
they would call the man to step forward, to come out of the line and tell him to mount the gallows. Did he know before?
No, he did not know before.
Who would be the hangman?
The SS. And there were also punishments by beating. The beatings, they had this special chair designed for that purpose. The inmate had to enter into this chair. His hands were put inside and his feet, and the lower part of his body was exposed, and on both sides 2 SS people were standing, and they had whips in their hands. And they would beat him, and the inmate had to count the blows.
Were you also flogged in this way, in the
Yes.
same way? How many floggings did you get?
It was 3 times. I was whipped 3 times. Once it was, but I was then told that I did not reach 25 floggings. I fainted. Apparently, I also relieved myself in the course of this.
And then again, strokes of the lash repeatedly?
Yes, yes. And then on the next morning, a delegation appeared. We were surprised to see SS people. And in the center, I saw Eichmann.
In the center of this commission, you saw Eichmann.
Yes.
Is this the man you saw at the time?
Well, he has changed, but his features have not changed. I remember that well. The moment when they first said that, when I heard that there were searches for him, now, I knew this was the man.
What did he do in the camp?
He reviewed very superficially what they had. I was at the end of the line. I was low. I was not so tall. And when he passed, I heard something saying, take a whole pile away, something like that. Yes, das ganze Haufen wegnehmen, he said.
Judge Halevi, please repeat the words in German. Das ganze Haufen, is that all?
Das ganze Haufen, yes. Wegnehmen.
Who said it?
Eichmann said that.
An instruction by President of Court to the shorthand typist to note the words in their original language.
Well, none of us were ever called people, Leute. This did not exist. This was the same with all SS people. Haufen, the pile. Every German used that expression, this word.
Judge Halevi, what does it signify, Haufen?
A garbage pile, a pile of manure, something like that.
And this referred to the prisoners,
Yes,
didn't it?
yeah, of course.
When were you liberated from Majdanek?
In 1944, the beginning of 1944.
As a Christian?
Yes, as a Christian.
You were called to the commander's office And what were you told?
I was told, at first I thought that my end had come, because this was the way for hanging people usually. They would call them by the loudspeaker. My number was called, and I was told to report in the office. There we stood for several hours. I saw some of the people, I knew some of the people who had been there, mainly Polish boys. There were no Jews among them. And then we were taken to a house. It was known as the Red House in Majdanek. There, this was the office of the administration. And an SS man came out who spoke Polish and told us that we were free. But first, we had to sign that we would never tell what we had seen.
When was that, the date?
It was in the spring of 1944.
Attorney General, was there a case of a Jew being released from Majdanek?
No.
That he was known to be a Jew and released. Was there such a case ever?
Never.
Dr. Savatius?
None was left. There was a dog that I saw.
Whose was that dog?
That dog belonged to one SS man from camp number 3. We called him Bedel. He was actually responsible for the showers and what was indeed gas chambers. Later on, this dog was passed to Unterscharführer Paul. He called the dog Mensch, and when he set the dog on the prisoners, he said, "Man, attack the dog." He said, "You are actually my representative. You are my deputy." This is what he would say to the dog. Then whoever was caught by the dog would be killed by the Germans, because the Germans didn't like to see any wounded people, any sick people. I was bitten twice by that dog. I still have the marks on my body. This was a pure fluke that I really remained alive in spite of it. There was another dog, but it was a bit weaker. The other one was extremely big, was as big as a calf, so to speak. First of all, he would overthrow a man right away, and the men attacked by him were completely helpless. And after work, people were simply afraid to approach the area where the dog was to be expected. And they would walk a distance of about 300 meters.
I have here a sketch drawn by one of our other witnesses about Sobibor. By permission of your honors, I do not have a copy of this diagram, but I would like the witness to point out a number of places in this sketch. He identified them. He says the sketch is correct. I would like to show it to the witness now.
It is
President of Court, it will be a little difficult because either he sees it or we do. Mr. Hausner, could the witness approach the bench? And perhaps we could also approach by your permission. Dr. Savatius, President of Court, Dr. Savatius, could you also please come to the bench, and we shall all of us look at this sketch. Mr. Hausner, where did you get to in the trains? Or where would the trains be arriving?
This was within the camp.
It says here on the sketch, SS train. Is that inside the camp? President of Court, I see that your voices are not carried because you are not speaking into the microphone. We shall have to make some kind of an arrangement here. Mr. House, no. Now you would arrive at this place marked on the map SS train. This is where you got into the camp.
It was more or less like this. There were also internal barbed wire entanglements, and people were brought to such a place.
Would you look in the middle of the map here, Mr. Freiberg? Can you know?
Oh, yes.
Can you identify this?
They would bring people to a certain place at first, and that was actually the first stop of the people. Here they would be selected, namely men who were sifted from women and children. Then they would continue to go that way, which is indicated here.
President of Court, I see it is still not, the arrangements are still not good enough. Your voices are not carried. I think the witness should return to his to the witness box. It is a little difficult to arrange it in this way.
Those belonging soaked with blood.
What was your occupation in Sobibor? What were you engaged in?
I was doing all sorts of odd jobs. Most of my work consisted in the so-called selection stores. Let me say we were selecting the belongings of people, but I did all sorts of work in the camp. I was, for instance, cleaning the residential quarters of the Ukrainians, and for a certain period of time I was also shearing women's hair before they entered the gas chambers.
Who ordered you to perform this work?
I was ordered then after the interval occurred in the transports. Then carriages arrived with all sorts of building material.
President of Court, did you understand the question?
Then they built.
Mr. Hausner, who gave you the orders to cut off women's hair?
This was SS Ganeski.
President of Court, men and women?
Only grown-up women.
What would be done with the hair?
When we returned from there, then we saw big bags, and we loaded those bags with hair.
Do you know what happened to the hair later?
We put them on trucks.
What happened to your group, the 150 people? How long did you stay there? How many of you survived after a month?
About 50 people.
What happened to the others?
All of them were murdered in all kinds of ways. Part of them were burned, part of them were gassed, some of them went mad and were shot at immediately by the Germans on the spot.
Did you try to commit suicide?
Yes, I did. I made an attempt. I hadn't slept that night. This was after the case of a suicide of my friend. And we saw that a friend of mine had committed suicide. Each of my friends either committed suicide or was killed one way or another. And we thought, why should we just wait for death which was attended upon us? Why should we still go through the ordeal of suffering? Why should we make the Germans happy? Everyone said that, but the implementation of the plan was not very easy. That night I decided to commit suicide. I took a belt and I tried. I must admit that I was shilly-shelling, that I still had some hope flickering in my mind. I thought perhaps I would be saved one way or another. I had my doubts and then I abandoned the idea. Later on I was Jerusalem, Hallelujah, Amen.
Mr. Hausner, was there another song which you had to recite about all the Jews being cheats and so on?
There is another song.
Could you just quote that one verse about the Jews being cheats and crooks?
בסוף נגמר, von Israel abstamm ich, die Ehrlichkeit verdamm ich, zwei sind weiß, dann esse ich nicht von Schwein, ich bin ein Jude, weil ein Jude sein.
There was another song, I come from Israel. The song started, I despise honesty. I do not eat pork. I am a Jew, I want to be a Jew.
Mr. Hausner, there were also horrible types of torture, weren't there?
It beggars all description. It is very difficult to relate about it now because it's almost impossible to believe it. I can tell you about one day out of all those horrible days we passed. This was the selection day. They would begin the selection of belongings, and we managed to bring all the belongings into one big pile, and the supervisor would come, and we saw that there was an open umbrella on a roof. This was about the height of 7 meters. One boy wanted to close it. He was ordered to close it and had to climb a building and fell down. But just because he fell down, he was given 25 strokes. This was at the height of 5 or 7 meters. An open umbrella was suspended. He was supposed to close it. And he fell down and was beaten to death. And they one said, I found among the Jews parachutists. This is what the SS men said. And then he would ask one man after the other to climb the rooftop and open the and close the umbrella. As a matter of fact, almost all the people fell down, and each one who fell down was beaten to death. And the dog which was on the spot would accompany the strokes by his bites. And other people were shot on the spot, so that all the people who were working there would pass through that ordeal. Later on, they would invent other little games. There were, for instance, cases that people had to run and be shot at.
5 people were bound up, their trousers were bound with a rope, and they were filled with mice. Mice were stuck into the trousers, and they had to stand at attention. But of course they could not hold out. They were beaten horribly. And this is how it went on, and the Nazis amused themselves. And when this was over, there was one Jew, Paul, and other Germans called him Ivan the Terrible. Yes.
Ivan the Terrible.
Yes, that's what they called him. Half of his beard was shaved off, half of his head, and one of his eyebrows. A Jewish barber had to do it to him by instructions. And they always had to appear at the roll call, these two people.
Shaven, I understand?
Half shaven, yes, half of their face. And they tortured him horribly. I often heard him plead to be shot, but he was always brought back alive after all these tortures. And then they ordered him to go to this box office which they had, where they had the drugs, and they brought a few bottles of drugs, and he was made to drink the stuff. He became yellow and dropped as if he were dead. The German ordered for water to be brought and spilled over him. He was beaten, but he felt nothing. He was numb. This took almost all day until the man again came to our camp, the Scharführer. He said that a board should be brought, and people had to walk along that plank very slowly, step by step, and sing the march, the morning march. On that day alone, I don't know how many died, but I saw a few incidents with my own eyes. I think 5 or 6 people at least died within my eyes. I saw that.
What you saying?
And these tortures, I should like to say something else about it in general. They made animals out of us. People had to walk on all fours and bark. And there was one man who for several days, his function was to run all day like a dog on all fours and bark and grab at other people as if he were a dog. And they invented various things. In fact, they disrupted work through these so-called amusements. Often we just simply couldn't work. It couldn't be called work, it was just for their amusement.
Yes. To what unit these Germans belonged?
SS.
An SS man, I understand, who told you that he couldn't possibly carry on this work any longer. Is that so?
Yes, yes. It was an extraordinary case, an exception. I was working in laying a narrow gauge railroad, which was then used for the bodies and for carting off the bodies and the wounded people, and I was laying that track, and there was one German, Götzlinger was his name. He was a horrible sadist. He would kill people with his hammer, with hammer blows. And one day I came there for work, and there was a man named Untersturmführer Schwarz, I believe his name was. I'm not too sure. And as much as we were afraid of these SS people, I always feared a new man even more. We saw a new SS man, a senior officer. I was awfully afraid.
High-ranking officer in what rank?
Untersturmführer. Relatively, this was high-ranking for our concepts. I loaded a lot of these railroad pieces of the rails on my back, and he said, "You're mad. Why do you load so many of these pieces on your back?" So I unloaded one rail, and he came and took off another few rails, and he stopped me again. He said, "We have time. You can walk slowly." So I walked slowly, and this is how I worked that day. When I came home in the evening, I related this incident to the people, and it became a legend. And there was this legend then that there is an SS man who behaves like a human being. At first people would refuse to believe it, but others encountered him. We saw him when the transports came. He walked about very ashamed. He would, sometimes he would say a good word, but he would hide his face, he would be ashamed. He stayed there for about a month or 6 weeks, that's all. And once he came in the evening to our barrack and told us. I didn't know where I was being brought to. I didn't know this in advance. And when I learned, I immediately asked for a transfer, he said. And I'm leaving you now. He shook hands with some people and wished us to survive, that we might survive, and he left. He was an only case. A very, certainly an only case. There was something, another case, but this was an old SS man, but this was different. All the others, it wasn't that they only carried out instructions. They rejoiced in this. I think they invented the instructions. Well, if they only had followed instructions, they would exterminate people. But these tortures, that was not part of the instructions. And there was one man who was transferred because his tortures had disrupted the work, and they had to transfer him.
I decided to wait until the uprising took place. The date was set for the 14th of October. This was a Thursday, I believe, from 3:30 until the roll call for 4:15. We had to kill every German coming our way and run.
Where did you take arms?
We had no arms, but a number of girls and children who polished shoes for the SS men and cleaned floors, other work. They, during the very last hours, stole a few hand grenades, a rifle, a submachine gun, and a number of pistols and brought them into the camp. I had to do some work on gate number 1, on the main gate of camp number 1. I was busy with a friend named David, and 20 men were standing under the tool shed. When we removed all the tools, we put in 2 boys into the shed, and the Germans had all kinds of luxury things they ordered to send home in this tool shed. The man responsible for the work in this workshop sent to call the SS men that his order was ready. Untersturmführer Neumann was first to come in. He handed the horse to me and entered the carpentry. He was a small man, and he entered the hut.
Slower, Mr. Biskubicz, please, with your description.
Entered the carpentry, the man, and never came out. This Untersturmführer, he was commander of the camp at the time. He was killed in the carpentry. I saw an SS man go into the shoemaker's workshop, and he was killed there. Later, on a bicycle, entered one of the Ukrainians, and he was killed also in at the shoemaker's shop.
And the Germans had not yet noticed that there was an uprising?
No, they did not notice.
When did they notice?
Frankfurt felt he noticed something after Neumann was killed. He was walking about with a whip, shouting. He noticed, and he was afraid to enter the camp. 13 Germans were killed in this way, and a number of Ukrainians, altogether some 18. I saw the men coming from the woods, killed the 2, put them on the cart. They killed the men at the shoemakers.
Whom did they kill?
The Germans, the SS men who came into that shop.
What did the others do in the meantime?
The others were waiting for the sign to attack the munitions dump. I had to give the sign. But at the last moment, Bauer arrived with drinks for camp number 2, and he was looking for laborers. He did not notice that everybody was busy on a different job. This was exactly a few minutes before the uprising. Took me and David to camp number 3. After we left to camp number 2, it was the witness mistake, by the casino. was kept. He took us to camp number 2, and there were already 100 men on the walk, and in a few minutes' time the uprising should have broken out. We arrived there and helped to unload the first case of drinks to the building. We saw Herman Michael, the cashier, counting the money. He did not notice anything. I had a knife. I stabbed him, and David stabbed the other. We locked him into the cash room and ran out to drag the other case of drinks. We heard hurrah, the uprising began.
Hurrah was the password?
This was the slogan for the uprising. And there were shots already in the air. And this man, Bauer, David, ran towards field number 1. Bauer drew his gun and shot after him, running after him. And that is how the uprising started. We all ran. We entered the munitions dump and held the post as long as we could. Then we ran.
How did you break through the fence?
The fence, I could not run towards the fence. I had to run towards camp number 3.
Why could you not run in that direction?
I was certain that I would be killed. There was too much shooting going on for me to escape.
How did you get out of the Sobibor area?
I remained near the lazaret, that is, within the lazaret until after midnight. And after jumping the fence 2 meters high, through the courtyard where the people would undress before going into the gas chambers, I ran near to very high storerooms which I helped building for the parcels taken from the victims. I was shot at by the guard on the tower from camp number 3, but it was dark and he did not hit me. I succeeded in reaching the lazaret, a small wood, near the Nord camp.
President of Court, he said it was a little clump of trees. It shows on the sketch.
If the court permits, I shall explain regarding the names of a number of camps.
President of Court, the question is, it's pretty obvious. This was within among the trees.
Yes, this was amongst the trees, but in this Camp Nord, they stored munitions. I was lying in the lazaret until after midnight and did not know how to get away. I kept on running. Later, many SS men came with the Ukrainian officers and began shooting towards me in my direction, believed that no one was there and left at night. I started through barbed wire fences and opened them up with my bare hands until I noticed that the gate near the tower in the Nord camp was wide open. The guard was not there.
How did you call that camp, President of Court?
Nord camp. They had munitions and explosives in that camp. There were bunkers where they kept munitions and explosives.
Mr. Hausner, and finally you managed to cross the barbed wire.
Yes.
And you wandered about in the forests, and you met someone else who had fled from Sobibor.
Yes. I met, the first Jew I met was 4 months later. Then I understood this was Nehemiah, who succeeded in breaking into the munitions dump and take a submachine gun.
And then you met Sasha?
Later we met Sasha.
And all of you joined a partisan group.
This is a shortcut, but too much of a shortcut.
President of Court, of course. Witness. When we entered the cellar, we saw inscriptions on the wall. These inscriptions said, "No one leaves this place alive. Whoever can should save himself." Every day and every night, 2 or 3 of us are being taken away and they do not return. No one survives this place very long. When people are taken to work, they are being shot, and immediately in the first night we lit a little candle and we saw these inscriptions on the wall.
On the next morning, whilst you were in the cellar, you heard a German speaking over a loudspeaker.
In the morning, when we got there, when the truck arrived with people, we did not know how many people, but we heard
in de Noordvoet, het zijn kop was en alle voeten, het kriegt het andere ongetest en het gaat alle zu der Arbeit.
and I heard somebody went outside and said, "Now you are going to the bathhouse, you will get new clothes, and then you will go out to work."
And the people applauded, they clapped.
Yes, people applauded, some did, they were happy, now they would be working.
In de mensen opgegaan van Noord aangegaan in Caritas naar huis, gewesen speziell aufgeschrieben zum Badenzimmer. Alle aangegaan en zijn zich ausgeteen. Danach hat man einsam gesessen in Kehle. Man hat nicht gewusst, der ist dann wurde man gesessen. Sie hat man nicht gewusst, was das ist. Na, man hat gehört reden von Kehle, hat man gehört, was man redet. Und alle hat man geöffnet noch der Tee, hat man sich alle raus zum Badenzimmer. Alle rausgegangen. Ich stand aufgestellt von Caritas geht raus, von Jens an Otto.
We heard how the people were told to go to the bathhouse. They all passed through the door into a long corridor. We did not know exactly what was happening. We were in the basement, in the cellar. But we heard what was happening outside. They were all told to go to the bathhouse, and they went through this corridor and through this gangway, and then there was a truck on the other side.
People boarded those trucks. They went on to the trucks.
Die assessmenten mit Patekes und zu hargen und so herangejuckt Notera.
People saw these trucks and did not want to board them, but there were SS men with great sticks, and they beat the people and forced them to board the trucks.
What were those trucks?
Sie gewähnen den ganzen Zieh gemacht, blechen den ganzen Wend. Da hinten gewähnen 2 Tieren.
But do you know now what these trucks were? Today, do you know what they were?
Yes, I know now. These were trucks that were completely sealed. They had 2 doors. Yes, now I know what they were. They were trucks where people were locked up inside and when gas was piped into the trucks.
What happened to you on the next day?
Not on the Menschen sich ran, wenn man zu vergaß. Vorher musste man stille, die Maschine zu gehen, die Maschine ist weggefahren. So hat man gearbeitet den ganzen Tag.
What did you do?
Dort ist weggefahren, hat Münzer rausgenommen von dem Mann von Kehle. Man hat genommen alle Sachen mit der Schier, schnell raus in dem Zimmer, und dann angezogen im 3., 4. Zimmer, dort alles auf der Kippe aufgeworfen, ist gelegen, viele Sachen, ungeleikt.
On the next day, we kept working and more people were put into the place. We heard the screams from the trucks and the engine began working and the gas flowed in. Then the shouts died off. And we, 5 of us, were taken from the cellar, and we had to take the objects, the clothing and the shoes left behind, and put them in a room which was already full of shoes and clothing.
And in the evening, the people came back from work in the woods.
Dann zurückgekommen, aber es hat schon gefehlt, 2, 3. Es haben sich gerade gekriegt zur Arbeit, hat man den Ball geschossen, und so verzeiht ist, bis dort Titze.
They returned from work, but 2 or 3 were already missing. These people had grown weak and they no longer could work. They were shot and left behind at the place of work.
And they came back and related what happened in the woods. The witness said so. This is a correction by the Attorney General to the court interpreter. And on the following day, you yourself went to work in the wood and saw what was taking place with your own eyes.
Habe ich nicht gewollt überbleiben, aber ich schon gewiss, wie zu stellen, weil man genommen neckt, der erste Finne wird mir begelassen. Hat mich gestellt in der Mitte an, soll mit raus von zur Arbeit, in Waldera.
On the next day, I did not want to stay, I did not want to be there. I was among the first 5 who were taken outside to work in the forest.
Why did you want to go to work in the woods?
Dort sitzen den ganzen Tag in Kehle.
Well, why should I have stayed there? Why should I have stayed in the cellar all day? I didn't want to do that.
What were they doing in the wood?
That's where they dug the ditches. There were 25 people there and they were all digging trenches.
Das ist noch gewesen, für 2 Tage vor Jahr, 1941. Aber 1941.
We would leave early in the morning, 6:30 a.m. It was dark. It was in the winter. It was 2 days before the New Year. It was at the end of 1941, before the New Year.
You dug graves, and then a truck arrived, or one of those trucks.
Nog da iemand gegruben de Griebe, en gekommen die Autos zu gehen mit angejuckte Menschen. Hat man rausgenommen 5, 6 Mann. Und man hat gemisst rausschleppen die Menschen, hat man geöffnet dort, hat man Ballen Stiege gelost. Ist dort gestanden, haben wir nicht 2, ist rausgegangen. Das ist eine Reue von den Menschen, von der Motto. Und man hat gemisst rauswerfen, alle Menschen auf der Reihe. Neben der Griebe. Nicht herup in der Griebe, nur neben der Griebe.
When the trucks arrived, we still were not permitted to approach them. We had to wait until the truck had stopped for a few moments, 2 or 3 minutes, and fumes were coming out of the trucks, and we had to wait, and then 5 or 6 people opened the doors and take the bodies and place them near the trenches, right near the trenches.
Were the people dead?
Gewesen ganzen Teut. Also, einer, was hat noch gewähnt, was ich gut gekannt, von den Stuttmann, gewähnt auch ein Kräftiger, hat noch ein bisschen gelebt, was einer zu gegangen hat und geschossen bald, nach der Cholera. Der eine, was gewähnt, war die ganze Zeit, von dort hat noch gelebt.
They were all completely dead. No one was alive anymore. These people who were taken from the trucks. But I remember once, in all that period, there was one man, a man of my town, a healthy and strong man, who still showed signs of life, and then someone approached him and shot him dead. But this was the only time. The man's name was Jakobowicz.
And then the Ukrainians would come up and pull out gold fillings and remove rings from the corpses.
Noch ein Mensch gestanden, und man musste jeden einen mal wegnehmen in der Saat. Und rausgerissen mit der gestanden, einer ein Ukrainer gewesen, einer ein Deutsch. Hat gerettet, ein schwachen Deutsch, konnte kein verstehen. Mit der Zwang in der Hand und rausgerissen, die goldene Zehen. Und wer sich an den Finger, sonst kann er abnehmen und abgeschnitten den ganzen Finger.
And then they would place them one by one. And Ukrainians were standing there always in pairs, a Ukrainian and a German. The Ukrainian did not speak very good German. They had pliers in their hands. They pulled the gold teeth and would take off the golden rings. If the ring did not get off easily, they would cut off the entire finger.
And then two trucks approached.
Yes, one after another, one after another.
And you would bury the corpses.
Die Menschen aus so sind gelegen, noch hat man sich gemisst herabfahren von der Grieberei. Und dort gestanden spezielle Menschen, die haben sich gemisst ausschlagen, gleich. Einen neben dem anderen, sonst sagen, du a Kopf, du a Fies.
Later they placed them there and we had to bury them. There were people whose work it was to place the bodies so that they would form only one layer, and they would place a head on one side, the feet on the other side, all in one layer.
And the third truck, there was a person you knew.
No, in Hashem gearbeitet habe Porteg dort. Ich kam von wie ich gewohnt. Hat mir genommen die ganze Stuhl.
This was after I had been working there for some time, when all the people of my town came.
And who was amongst them?
My wife and my two children.
And you saw them whilst they were being removed from the truck.
I lay near my wife and two children, I wanted them to shoot me. And one SS man told me, you still have enough strength, you can work, and he pushed me away.
And on the same evening you tried to hang yourself.
Nein, nur ich bin zurückgekommen auf die Nacht, ich will nicht mehr leben. Aber ich wollte aufhängen, am der Geweiher und Dübelke nicht gelassen. So hat gesagt, ich bin ein Jüdischer, sagt hast noch auf der Augen, hast du noch Hoffnung. Hast du mir noch etwas Hoffnung herauszukriegen.
That night I came home and I wanted to hang myself, but my friends would not let me. They said, as long as your eyes are open, there is some hope. Perhaps you will be rescued in some way.
And a few days later you escaped.
Noch ich bin nahe Jahr, hat man nicht gearbeitet. Die Tag noch immer weiter ganze Arbeit und umgehen zu klären, wie soll ich mit noch einem, wie soll man darf etwas rausbringen. So hat man nicht gekriegt mehr, man weiß, man wird nicht raus mehr mit dem Leben, aber es hat ins Gelingen ja nicht. Immer gefahren zur Arbeit.
And then it was the new year, and we did not work. We started thinking, some of our friends and myself, how we could escape. We still had some strength. We thought we would try, either it would be successful or not, but we'd have to make the effort.
Nächsten Tag bald noch die Jantuchse der Arbeit, noch die Nahjahre. Immer heimgekommen auf der Nacht, immer heimgefahren mit einem Autobus und gegangen an Lastauto. Immer gesessen 15 Arbeiter.